if you have consistently high cortisol levels, your body actually knows that a good workaround, eat something sugary. Because if you eat something sugary, if you eat something, it's going to spike your insulin. Well, what does insulin do? Well, insulin drives down your cortisol levels. And so with endurance athletes, that's one of the things that we frequently see.
So cortisol is released from the stress from the workout, correct?
Yeah, so cortisol, anytime your body perceives a threat or anything like that, your body will actually start to then produce what we call a cortisol dump. And so it dumps a bunch of cortisol. So it's essentially just fight or flight response. And so as soon as your body identifies the fact that there's a fight or flight, it mobilizes all the physiological systems necessary to either meet or beat that threat. And one of the things that it does is, you perceive the threat, you're just like, oh no, I've either got to fight this thing or get away from it. Dumps a bunch of cortisol in your system. Cortisol then releases a whole bunch of glucose, which is good if you're in a workout or trying to escape a threat. And then, you either basically one or the other. And when you have a hard time shutting that off, your body's got other ways that it will kind of help to shut it off for you, if you will. And one of those ways is, and we see a lot with folks who have sometimes a bit of a binge eating problem later in the evening. That's one of the things that we frequently is they typically don't eat enough food throughout the earlier part of the day. And then they come home, and you kind of calm down, it's comfortable surroundings, and you're like, I'm hungry now. Let's eat.
One of the best things a guy told me when I first started riding, he said, eat like a king at breakfast, a prince at lunch, and a pauper at dinner. He said, when I say a pauper, I don't mean no food and starve yourself. I mean high nutrient, low cal. You're going to bed. You don't need to be, and some people think like, I'm not going to eat breakfast. I'm going to have this little lunch. I'm being good today. And then they're like, uh-oh. And you can't, I think we've all been there, but like, at least for myself, when I've, gotten not knowing what I was doing with food, you get there and you're like, I just can't stop eating. Like your brain takes over and it's just like, see ya. So do you recommend, obviously if you're talking about 1 to 2 grams per kg of body weight, for me, that's about 160 grams of protein. I'm going to be needing to eat it throughout the day. Is there a time that an athlete should try to focus on this? And do you skew that one way or the other based on it's a rest day? Or I feel more carnivorous after I've lifted, and I don't know if that's BS or if that's actually my body like, yo, dude, eat some protein and get it in there.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that's definitely, part of it for sure is, get some food in there, right after that workout, because the first thing that you eat is typically kind of what's going to be shuttled to your muscles, after essentially a workout where you're, not, hopefully haven't had too big of a meal too soon to your workout. So your body's kind of running on empty, as it were, but one of the things I would suggest as far as like how to kind of divvy it up throughout the day, if you will, is definitely eat a good, eat a breakfast that's rich in protein. I'm not saying not to have carbs with breakfast, but definitely have, a good protein, a quality protein. As a matter of fact, like like steak and eggs is like no joke, like the breakfast of champions. I'm typically a big fan of red meat in the morning. And that's largely because red meat's got more, it's got a higher concentration of tyrosine in it. And tyrosine is an amino acid that is the metabolic precursor to dopamine. So dopamine's, it's a catecholamine, but it's also that neurotransmitter that's like, all right, let's get stuff done. So it's kind of like, after you have that first half of your first cup of coffee in the morning, you're charged up and ready to go. Yes, it's the caffeine, but caffeine also kind of elicits a little bit of a dopamine response on top of that. And so there's a lot of research to kind of back that up too, in that, most research that has looked at, high protein versus high carbohydrate breakfasts have actually shown that students will perform both physically perform better both physically and cognitively after having a rich protein breakfast versus a high carbohydrate breakfast. As far as, kind of when to divvy it up after that throughout the day, I would definitely suggest having, a good protein rich meal immediately following training or within the first, hour, 2 hours after training, something like that. And then into the evening, it's kind of an interesting thing because one of the things that you will frequently see too with endurance athletes, and this is just endurance athletes in general, is sometimes more often than not, they don't sleep very well, or their quality of sleep is not very good, or they don't sleep long enough. And so one of the things that I do and suggest is when that's present is to actually have carbohydrates with their dinner. because your body can actually synthesize and release cortisol even when you're asleep. And so by having, some carbohydrates later in the evening, like with your dinner, like a sweet potato, something like this, brown rice, steel cut oats, something along those lines, brown rice, wild rice, it actually helps to blunt the cortisol response a little bit. And so that actually puts you in a little bit of a better position to actually then start winding down for sleep.